In the last 3 videos, you've learned everything you need to do to put together a long essay question. How to understand the prompt, build claims, structure your essay, and add contextualization and complexity. In this video, we're going to look at the rubric for the essay and walk through a model example and showing you where and why it earns the rubric points. At the very end of the last video, I briefly displayed a basic framework for the LEQ as a reminder of what we've learned. Let's look at it again. The first paragraph has our contextualization and thesis, which is made up of at least 2 historical claims. Each body paragraph then repeats one of the claims from the thesis, then supports it with specific pieces of historical evidence. Evidence is almost always specific nouns relevant to the content of the prompt. We also mentioned what you could possibly do to add complexity to the structure and get that elusive point. Now let's look at the rubric and see how the structure earns points for this essay. So here's the official College Board rubric used to grade the LEQ. You see that it has 4 main items with a point scale and explanations. Now here's the simplified version of the rubric. It has the same things, but I've worded it to make it a little clearer. So let's go through this. Now the first thing an AP reader looks for when grading your essay is the thesis. It needs to be made up of strong historical claims. And as we've said throughout all of these videos, the claim needs to respond directly to the prompt with some specific history. So the grader looks straight away at the beginning of your essay for a thesis. If they don't find it there, they'll turn to the end of the essay. Sometimes students write a conclusion, which by the way is not required, and they earn the rubric point there. And this is the only justification for writing a conclusion to the LEQ. If, after having spent 40 minutes thinking and analyzing the essay topic, you can think of a better thesis, then write it there. Otherwise, no conclusion. Let's turn to a model essay and look for the thesis. First, remember the prompt. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which the expansion of land-based empires changed social structures between 1450 and 1750. A thesis responds directly to that prompt with specific history, and you'll see in the first paragraph of this essay an attempted thesis right here. As empires expanded, some of them, such as the Mughals and the Russians, greatly limited the power of local aristocrats to help centralize their rule. Expanding empires in this period also had to find ways to incorporate people of different cultures and ethnicities into their societies. Let's check the claims of the thesis to see if they work. They've got to deal with the expansion of land-based empires, changing social structures, and they have to be limited to the developments between 1450 and 1750. Both of these work. They make claims about the specific ways the expansion of empires in this era had an effect on society. We have a thesis here. The next rubric point is contextualization, and we spent most of video 3 explaining that skill. And here it is at the beginning of the essay. The essay begins outside the bullseye of the prompt, moving back to the previous time period, and walks through relevant history to set up the thesis. It's important to know that contextualization is connected to the thesis, and not just anything that happened before this time period. This attempt is relevant. Another rubric point. The essay now has scored 2 out of a possible 6 points. Now on to the evidence, which can add a total of 2 more points to our score. The first point for evidence is pretty easy, and a lot of students get this. You have to include evidence, which usually means nouns relevant to the topic. For example, if you're writing about the Ottoman Empire and you mention Janissaries, there is a piece of evidence, and it counts towards that first point even if you haven't used it in an argument. Do this a couple of times in your essay, and you get that first point. To get the second point, you need to kick it up a notch. To use Janissaries as an example, if you argue that as the Ottoman Empire expanded, military elites, such as the Janissaries, became more important and rose in the social hierarchy, now you're using evidence in an argument that answers the prompt. So often students think an essay is story time or an invitation to dump everything they know about a topic into an essay. But unless you're using those facts to support a claim, you'll never get that second evidence point. See, if you're writing about the Russian Empire, mentioning Ivan IV isn't enough, unless it's about his expansion of the empire and how it affected society. If writing about the Qing Empire, it's got to be about how the expansion of the empire elevated some groups into power or perhaps limited or diminished the power of other groups. And you have to sustain this specific thought throughout your entire essay. And by the way, it's worth mentioning that the purpose of the LEQ is not to test how much content you know about a topic. Rather, is to see if you can make an argument. Making arguments with a few carefully chosen pieces of evidence will score higher than a random content dump in the essay. So let's turn to our model essay again and look for evidence. In the body paragraph, we see several relevant pieces of evidence. Ivan IV is here, the aristocratic class known as the boyars, both of which are relevant to this time period. We also see the Mughal landowners, or the zamindars, along with the Mughal Emperor Akbar. This first paragraph alone has enough evidence to get that first easy point. But the evidence continues in the second body paragraph. The conquest of Constantinople, the millets of the Ottoman Empire, they're both relevant pieces of evidence. This is a slam dunk for that first evidence point. But what about the second point? Are these being used in an argument? Look at the argument here. Under Ivan IV, the expanding Russian Empire had to deal with powerful landowners called boyars, who refused to give up local power to the emperor. Many boyars were transferred far from their estates. Others were simply killed. Is the evidence of Ivan and the boyars being used in an argument? The prompt is about how the expansion of empires led to social changes. So yes, this does support it. And don't be afraid to use the terms of the prompt across your essay to keep yourself anchored to the essay's topic. The next paragraph also uses evidence in an argument. The evidence is the fall of Constantinople and the millet system, all relevant to the Ottoman Empire. And as we've seen, this would help earn that first evidence point. But they would also get the second evidence point because they're being used to show how the expansion of empires led to social change. Here are those words from the prompt again. Before we move on, let's look at some alternate paragraphs. When Peter the Great became the leader of Russia, he did all kinds of things. He copied a lot of technology from Western Europe. He made a navy, and he took land from Sweden. He even built a beautiful capital city, St. Petersburg. Note that this has evidence, but none of it is used to build an argument. It's what I call story time. And my answer to all of this is, well, so what? You're not supposed to be writing a Wikipedia article. You're supposed to be making an argument. And so many essays are written like this on the AP exam. Here's another example. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire took Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire fell. The Ottomans were successful because they used gunpowder, which had moved across the Asian trade routes. An important part of the Ottoman Empire was janissaries. They were children taken from homes in a practice known as the devshirme system. Again, so what? It's all true, but it doesn't get the job done. I mean, just compare that to this. As the Ottomans expanded into the Byzantine Empire, they took in a lot of Jews and Christians. The Ottomans adapted by creating the millet system, a practice that gave Jews and Christians freedom to practice their religion and culture in specific zones. As a result, Ottoman expansion created a more diverse society made up of people from different religions. And which one of these answers the prompt by explaining how the expansion of empires led to social changes? This one. It's not about how much you know, it's can you make an argument from history. So this essay gets both evidence points. It is now a 4 out of 6, and that's a pretty good score, by the way. But let's look for other rubric points. The last category in the rubric is called analysis and reasoning, and you can earn 2 points for this. The first point is earned by using historical reasoning to frame or structure your argument. So what does all this mean? Historical reasoning processes are implied in the prompt, and so the good news is that if you write your topic sentences the way these videos teach you to, you're already on your way to getting this point. For example, in our prompt about how the expansion of land-based empires changed social structure, if your topic sentence is a claim that directly answers the prompt, you're going to be making a claim about change. Your argument is framed. Now just sustain that analysis across the body of your paragraph. Revisit that reasoning process. Take a look at the synonyms for the process of change. The bar actually hasn't been too high for this point in the last couple of years, but just develop your paragraph and argument by writing out this skill. Look at this body paragraph. Do you see that the first paragraph set out a skill, comparison, and it sustains this skill across the paragraph? In other words, make sure your topic sentence is a claim that involves one of the reasoning processes and stay on topic as you write. Remember, I said the bar for this is not extremely high, and this paragraph is a strong example of that point. In fact, this paragraph takes an essay about changes and incorporates the skill of comparison. Remember the last video? A skill within a skill is a possible way to get the complexity point on the LEQ, and if developed a bit more, this method might make it here. The paragraph could extend the argument by saying that although Zamindars' aristocratic power was reduced by Akbar, many of them became civil servants of the Mughal state. Or the boyars, whose power was reduced by Ivan IV, did regain power. The Romanov dynasty that arose later in this time period came from the boyar class. Remember, complexity is difficult, and in my opinion, not worth worrying about if you're still having to master the other skills. A way to frame the complexity point, as we've seen in the previous video, is to make a counterclaim in the thesis that qualifies the claims. We call this the however claim. It can often be done by showing an exception to the assumptions of the prompt. If the prompt asks you to evaluate changes, your counterclaim could argue that in spite of your claims about change, there are important continuities as well. Each of the historical reasoning processes has an alter ego, or a flip side, that can help you argue to the complexity point. Just remember, simply stating the counterclaim doesn't get it. It has to be earned in the structure of the entire essay by weaving it across the argument or developing it in a separate paragraph. So does our model get the complexity point? The standards do change a little from year to year depending on the difficulty of the prompt, but I'm going to say no. As written, we have here a 5 out of 6. And let me tell you, that is an absolutely fantastic score on the LEQ. So thanks for watching these LEQ videos. Links to the model essay and the rubrics are below in the description. So bye for now, and look for forthcoming videos on the DBQ, the SAQ, and the multiple choice section of the AP exam.